think we are strong enough to take care of ourselves, and if need, we shall be even stronger.
If it was necessary to fight a war and for our Arab neighbors to lose in order to bring about peace, they had these opportunities. I hope that this will happen this time.
The preparations on site have been made.
No one should think of this while the Israelis are occupying my land, because this would mean surrender.
نجحت قواتنا المسلحة في عبور قناة السويس على طول المواجهة، وتم الاستيلاء على منطقة الشاطئ الشرقي للقناة، وتواصل قواتنا حالياً قتالها مع العدو بنجاح.
هنا القاهرة. جاءنا الآن البيان التالي من القيادة العامة للقوات المسلحة. نجحت قواتنا في اقتحام قناة السويس في قطاعات عديدة، واستولت على نقط العدو القوية بها، ورفع علم مصر على الضفة الشرقية للقناة. هنا القاهرة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نجحت قواتنا المسلحة في عبور قناة السويس على طول المواجهة، وتم الاستيلاء على منطقة الشاطئ الشرقي للقناة، وتواصل قواتنا حالياً قتالها مع العدو بنجاح. كما قامت قواتنا البحرية بحماية الجانب الأيسر لقواتنا على ساحل البحر الأبيض المتوسط، وقد قامت بضرب الأهداف الهامة للعدو على الساحل الشمالي لسيناء، وأصابتها إصابات مباشرة. هنا القاهرة.
Hona al-Qahira. This is Cairo. Today, Egypt is commemorating the anniversary of the 6th of October 1973 war. That's why we began our transmission today with the historic speech delivered by the Egyptian military following the 6th of October war. The 1973 war showcased the resilience and determination of the Egyptian military. With strategic planning and fierce determination, Egypt not only challenged the status quo, but also reshaped the dynamics of the Middle East, paving the way for future peace efforts and establishing a legacy of national pride. You're watching Q News, and now let's get the latest news this hour. Israeli occupation forces continue to launch heavy airstrikes on Beirut's southern suburbs. French President Emmanuel Macron calls for a halt to arms shipments being sent to Israel for use in the war on Gaza and Lebanon. And an Israeli airstrike in central Gaza kills 24 Palestinians and injures dozens more. It's just after 4 o'clock Cairo local time, and you're watching Q News. Let's start our bulletin today with the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين. وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
The Israeli occupation forces have continued to launch heavy airstrikes on Beirut's southern suburbs. Media reports have added that the occupation forces carried out approximately 30 airstrikes over several hours. The strikes targeted areas around Al Saha Hotel and Burj Al Barajna in southern Beirut. Hezbollah, in a statement, has claimed responsibility for launching a large barrage of rockets targeting Israeli occupation forces in the Manara settlement and its surrounding in northern Israel's Upper Galilee, confirming direct hits. The group also announced targeting an Israeli force that had infiltrated Blida in the Marjayun district of southern Lebanon. Israeli media reported that Hezbollah fired 800 rockets at Israel over 4 days. Israel has intensified airstrikes in Beirut as international leaders pledge aid and address Lebanon's security challenges. Here's our report.
Israel has expanded its military operations in Lebanon, launching 8 airstrikes on Beirut's southern suburbs, including areas near the capital's main airport. The strikes targeted the Harat Harik municipality, Burj Al Barajna, and Shuaifat, with intense raids reported in the southern suburbs. Ambulances were dispatched as smoke rose from the affected areas. In response to the escalating situation, French President Emmanuel Macron announced plans for the international conference to raise humanitarian aid for Lebanon and strengthen security in the country's south. Macron reiterated France's support for the Lebanese armed forces and urged the international community to maintain stability in Lebanon. He also called for a halt to arms shipments involved in Gaza conflict, advocating for a political resolution. Egypt echoed Macron's call to stop arms exports to Israel, condemning Israeli violations of international law in both Gaza and Lebanon. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu criticized Macron's position on arms control. As the U.S. presidential election nears, Vice President Kamala Harris expressed concern over Lebanon's worsening humanitarian crisis. She announced an additional $157 million in U.S. aid to address basic needs as food, water, and protection for the Lebanese people.
Now, for more on this, we cross over to Rihem in the newsroom. Rihem.
Thank you, Mark. To help us analyze the escalating tensions in Lebanon, we're joined by a professor of political science and a specialist in Israeli affairs, Dr. Ayman Shaheen, who joins us from Dublin. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on Q News. So first, let's start off with how do you view the current criticism that faces Netanyahu's government, in addition to the Israeli army's conduct in general, specifically from someone like the French President Emmanuel Macron? We've seen a strong condemnation for the conduct taking place in Lebanon. Does this indicate that Netanyahu's government, in addition to Israel, is nearing global isolation? Sir, sir, I'm not sure if you can hear me clearly. Mr. Ayman, Dr. Ayman, can you hear me? There seems to be a slight technical problem, but we're still trying to contact Dr. Ayman.
And we'll return to Riham when we can. Now, French President Emmanuel Macron has called for stopping sending shipments of arms used in the conflict in Gaza and Lebanon as part of a broader effort to find a political solution.
Néanmoins, nous essayons aussi d'être cohérents. Et lorsque nous demandons des cessez-le-feu, c'est le cas pour Gaza, ça a aussi été le cas pour le Liban la semaine dernière, eh bien, nous tâchons de ne pas demander un cessez-le-feu tout en continuant à livrer les armes de la guerre.
French President Emmanuel Macron. The Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati reiterated his support for the joint appeal from France and the United States, backed by the European Union, calling for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon. Mikati urged international pressure on Israel to abide by the ceasefire and implement UN Resolution 1701. He praised French President Emmanuel Macron's decision to halt arms deliveries to Israel and emphasized the need for a political solution instead of continued war. And Egypt has welcomed French President Emmanuel Macron's call to stop arms exports to Israel in light of Israel's violations of international law and humanitarian law in Gaza and Lebanon. In a statement from the Foreign Ministry, Egypt affirmed that Macron's call aligns with the principles of international humanitarian law and reflects growing global outrage at Israel's brutal aggression in Gaza and Lebanon. Egypt urged the international community to act on the call and reiterated its demand for an immediate and lasting ceasefire in both Gaza and Lebanon. World leaders and Israeli officials debate potential responses to rising tensions, hitting at serious retaliation options. Meanwhile, Egypt has sent an aircraft loaded with tons of humanitarian aid to Lebanon to alleviate the unprecedented suffering caused by ongoing Israeli military operations. The aid includes large quantities of medical supplies, medicine, and tents destined for Lebanese hospitals and the hardest hit areas as part of Egypt's support efforts for Lebanon. Israeli media have reported that Iran's oil facilities and presidential complex are potential targets for Israeli attacks. They also suggested that the headquarters of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in Tehran and missile bases from which rockets were fired in recent attacks on Israel may also be targeted by Israeli forces. The Lebanese National News Agency has reported that Israeli artillery has bombed several villages and towns in southern Lebanon. Israeli warplanes also struck areas in Marjayun, Kafekila, Burj al-Maluk, Khem, Zauta and Mifdun in the Nabatea district. In addition, reconnaissance and drone aircraft have been flying intensively over villages in the Tyre and Bint Jabeel districts. Now, for more on this, we go over to the newsroom with Riham.
Thank you, Mark. Again, for further analysis on the escalating tensions in Lebanon, we're joined by Professor of Political Science and Specialist in Israeli Affairs, Dr. Ayman Shaheen, who joins us from Dublin on Qnews. Thank you so much, sir, for coming. First, can we start off with the major criticism that Netanyahu's government is facing, in addition to the Israelis in general, facing from leaders, specifically someone like the French President Emmanuel Macron? Do you think that this indicates that Netanyahu's government is very close to being isolated globally?
Yeah. Good evening. Actually, thank you for welcoming me. And regarding to Netanyahu, actually, after a year of this war against Gaza, this genocide war against Gaza, and then within the last few weeks started another war against Lebanon, this government, actually, I can say it is a fascist government, and that's not something radical to consider it as a fascist government. Since 7th of October 2023 till now, this government actually announced many targets, many targets. Nobody can actually recognize what are or what is the target, the Netanyahu's government's target. Many targets. He wanted to, for example, to occupy Gaza Strip. He wanted to establish military administration in Gaza Strip. He wanted to dismantle Hamas. He asked even on the 7th of October, if you remember, he asked Palestinians of the Gaza Strip to leave Gaza because he's going to launch a very devastated war. That's in his words, actually. He asked Palestinians of the Gaza to leave Gaza to give the Israeli army the opportunity to dismantle Hamas. So he wanted to occupy Rafah. He wanted to has control over Philadelphia border. He wanted to control the Rafah crossing, the only border between Gaza and the world through Egypt.
Yes.
Then he wanted to dismantle Hezbollah. And another ground war he launched against South Lebanon.
I see what you're trying to
he
get
wanted
at,
a
Dr.
new
Ayman.
Middle East regime. That many targets.
Yes.
Actually, this government announced. This Netanyahu announced. So this is the real fascism. This is
Yes,
the
but
real
does that
fascist,
actually mean that this government
That's
could be
Netanyahu.
isolated?
What's about Smotrich and Ben-Gvir? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that this means that this government could potentially be isolated or treated the way, for instance, South Africa was back in the times of the apartheid?
Yeah, actually, that's remind us of what exactly happened in South Africa during the apartheid regime. It is an isolated. Today, Israel is an isolated, between brackets, state. Even the traditional Israeli allies, the West, for example, the UK, the France. Yesterday, he accused President Macron regarding about the Macron's speech that to halt the sending weapon to Israel. And look, the real traditional Israeli friends in the West, the French, the British, the Belgium, the Dutch, the Spanish, all of them are criticizing them. The European Union, many times they criticized Netanyahu, and that's on the official level. But also on the public level, you can see the march in the streets in the West, in the United States, in London, in many UK cities, in Belgium, in Spain,
Yes, sir.
France, even in Germany.
There's widespread, as you were saying, sir.
Yeah,
there is widespread.
Even in Germany, that's publicly, actually,
Yes,
Israel
exactly.
lost
Which is why I want to ask you, sir, since publicly they have had issues.
Opinion. Israel is a state without ethics, actually. That's the reality that the Israelis will face in the future. And Israel will pay that price for the killing of thousands of kids, women, old men, the devastation of Gaza Strip. Even they are devastating, started their same target of devastation.
Yes, but sir, because this is the news bulletin, so we would like to sort of get to what we have to ask. Since you were saying there is generally a consensus around the world that the Israeli actions in Lebanon are just not acceptable, why do you think that the Israelis are continuing to intensify their aggressions on Lebanon, specifically in the last few hours?
Yeah, actually, that fascist government won't be able to continue launching such aggression in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, without the support of the American administration. I do believe that American administration are lying. What they are saying is something different, what they are practicing. They are with the ceasefire. They wanted ceasefire with Lebanon. They tried their efforts. What they announced, the White House, the spokesman, the Minister of Foreign, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and even the President. They are saying something, and they are practicing something different, totally different. Without that support, military support, financial support, support in the media and in the international organizations in the Security Council, who actually is protecting Israel of issue of that the Security Council issue a real specific resolutions against this type of aggressions, of genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. It is the United States who are using its veto power in the Security Council. Even the United States are again. They are talking. For example, let me give you.
Sir, I apologize. I have to cut you off there. I'm so sorry, but we're out of time for this segment of the news bulletin. Because I'm so sorry, sir. That was the professor of political science and a specialist in Israeli affairs, Dr. Ayman Shaheen. Thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we had to cut it off and cut it short. Back to you, Mark, in the studio.
Thank you, Raham. Now for the latest developments in Gaza, where 24 Palestinians were killed and dozens were injured when Israeli forces bombed a mosque sheltering displaced civilians near the gates of Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir el-Balah, central Gaza. The Israeli military claimed the strike targeted a Hamas command center in the city. Well, that's all we have time for on this news bulletin, but here's a recap of the headlines. Israeli occupation forces continue to launch heavy airstrikes on Beirut's southern suburbs. French President Emmanuel Macron calls for a halt to arms shipments being sent to Israel for use in the war on Gaza and Lebanon. And an Israeli airstrike in central Gaza kills 24 Palestinians and injures dozens more. And that's all for our news bulletin this hour. We have special coverage coming up later today of the 6th of October celebrations, so stay here with Q News for that. And don't forget to follow us on all the socials at QNewsEGY. And for real-time updates, you can connect with us on the UMS digital platform, Watch It. Thanks very much for staying with us today, and nice to have your company. Thanks for watching.